the Battle of Yultong.
The Philippines in North Korean War, the Battle of Yultong. The Korean War started 1950 to 1953, so UN forces led by South Koreans and US fight against communist-backed forces led by North Korea and China. Here, Denise Emille Duque explains the story of one of the countries that formed part of the UN forces, in which the Philippines. In particular, he looks at the feats of Filipino forces against Chinese troops in the 1951 Battle of Yultong. As the famous US general says, "Give me 10,000 Filipinos and I will conquer the world." General Douglas MacArthur. Artillery shells rained down upon the UN forces occupying the hills of Yultong. It was the opening salvos of Chinese spring offensive. The 10th BCT of the Philippine Expeditionary Forces sent to Korea braced itself for the what seems to be insistent typhoon of death and destruction. This is the story of 900 Filipino soldiers who defeat 40,000 Chinese and North Korean forces of the hills of Yultong. To understand our story, let's travel back to how this war started. On June 25, 1950, 75,000 North Korean troops, with Soviet and Chinese support, invaded South Korea to capture its capital city, Seoul. In response, the newly established United Nations passed UN Security Council Resolution 83 to urge UN member states to restore peace and order to the North Korean peninsula to the repulsion of communist forces by military actions.
Will show our United Nations forces crossing the 38th parallel. You'll see our paratroopers land near Wonsan. You'll see Republic of Korea troops in action. You'll see the strength of an infantry tank team. And from another part of the world, from Europe, the activation of SHAPE and a message from General Eisenhower.
The Philippines in Korea. The Philippines in Korea. One of the UN member states that heeded the Cold Wars was the Republic of the Philippines, which at that time was still recovering from the scars brought by the Imperial Japanese forces during the World War or the Second World War. Philippine President Elpidio Quirino urged Congress to approve the Republic Act 573 to deploy 7,420 Filipino troops to the Korean Peninsula. The President saw this as a commitment to help a friend and as a part of a large battle to defeat communism. He gave these words when he addressed the peftok soldiers. "Poor as we are, this country is making a great sacrifice in sending you there. But every peso invested in you is a sound investment for the perpetuation of your liberty and freedom."
전선 낙동강 방어선이다. 여기가 밀리면 부산, 부산이 밀리면 해운대 앞바다에 빠져 죽는 길 뿐이다. 후퇴는 없다.
First to dock in Busan, South Korea was 10th Battalion Combat Team of the Philippine Expeditionary Forces to Korea, or peftok, on September 19, 1950, shortly after General MacArthur successfully initiated landing.
The road to Wonsan is open. Initiate Operation Chromite.
대대원 모두 진심으로 수고 많았다. 우리 대대의 성전벌을 전함과 동시에 기쁜 소식 하나를 더 전하겠다. 오늘 새벽 미 해병대가 인천 상륙에 성공했다는 소식이다. 오후에 2차 상륙 작전이 있을 것이고 낙동강 전선에 우리 군도 총 반격에 나선다!
The men of the 10th Battalion, or BCT, the heroes of our tale, were made up of 64 officers and 1,303 enlisted men, led by Lieutenant Colonel Dionisio S. Ojeda. They were supposed to be motorized unit operating tanks, but none of the tanks arrived with them, so they were turned into a heavy weapons unit. Images of ruined sites or cities, refugees, and famine welcomed the battalion. All these were familiar and bitterly nostalgic to the Filipino troops. After all, those were the same sights they saw in their home after a few years back. Korean refugees quickly ran to them upon sight to beg for food, and the battalion obliged. Initial fighting. After the melancholic welcome, the Filipino forces was assigned to join the Turkish Brigade and the U.S. Puerto Rican 65th Infantry Regiment in the 3rd Infantry Division. Soon after, the 3rd Infantry Division faced the Communist North after the Battle of Yultong, which resulted in their victory. That was the first battle won by the Filipinos in a foreign land. In the spring of 1951, the 3rd Infantry Division was deployed along the area of the Indian River. The 3rd and 2nd Battalion of the U.S. 65th Infantry Battalion or Infantry Regiment Battalion positioned facing west along the river, with the Turkish Brigade occupying the east flank, and the 10th Battalion was at the center. Unknown to these men, a storm was brewing under their nose in form of Chinese Spring Offensive. Communist Chinese troops of the 44th Division of Chinese People's Volunteer Army under Commander Peng De Gui planned to attack and surround the 3rd Infantry Division. He deployed the 15th Army in a narrow zone between the Imjing River and Route 33. The 12th and the 60th Army were deployed to attack the position held by the 10th BCT and Turkish Brigade through the Pogain Sand Bridges. Chinese Spring Offensive. At around 2000s of 04/22/1951, artillery shells, mortar fire, machine gun, and small arms fire greeted the Turks at the start of the battle. At around 2300, waves of Chinese soldiers assaulted the 10th BCT position and engaged in a series of close quarter confrontations. Continuous artillery bombardment and some friendly fire cut the communications between troops in the 3rd Infantry Division. Fortunately, communication returned at 0030 and the Turkish Brigade received an order to retreat to a position on the line of south of Hantan River. Intensifying Chinese assaults forced the 65th Infantry Regiment to retreat several hundred yards to regroup and reorganize. The 10th BCT was surrounded and left alone to brave the ocean of communist Chinese forces. The 10th BCT non-combatants such as the chaplain, clerks, medics, cooks, and drivers threw themselves into the fray to bolster the strength of their outnumbered battalion. Men of the 10th fought dispersed and confused because of the lack of communication between the hills. The fighting went on and on, where some men were wounded, killed, and captured. Among the captured was Lieutenant Thomas G. Batillo of the Able Company of the 10th. Then Lieutenant Jose Arciaga Jr. led the Baker B Company to defend the strategic hill of Yultong, but they were pushed back by the unrelenting Chinese forces. At 0300, enemy forces penetrated deep in the formation and reached the position of Charlie Company in the reserve. Unfortunately, the company suffered heavy losses including Lieutenant Arshaga. While all this was happening, Lieutenant Colonel Dionisio S. Ojeda was ordered to withdraw and all units complied except Captain Conrado Yap's Heavy Weapons Company. Captain Yap led his men to counterattack to rescue the wounded and retrieve the dead. He opened the hatch of his tank and shot the Chinese with the mounted machine gun with his gun crew, firing as fast as they could. Chinese soldiers fell one by one at the rate of 17 to 1 in favor of the 10th. The Heavy Weapons Company succeeded, but at the price of Captain Yap's life. The 12th President of Philippines, Fidel Ramos, was also a peftok soldier. For the 20th, DCT commented about Captain Yap's action in his speech during the 42nd anniversary of the Battle of Yultong. Captain Yap, his mission accomplished, now ordered a withdrawal while making a head count of his boys and directing the withdrawal. He was hit by machine gun fire. The 10th held their ground until dawn, and by this time, the Chinese attack slowed down and this allowed the 3rd Infantry Division to retreat. Then the C Company of the 10th, supposed by 2 M24 Shafir light tanks of the Recon Company and Allied artillery, led a counter-attack to restore the lost area of D Company. The Filipinos fought until midday when General Robert Soule fell back to Lyon, Kansas, to a position in Anghungri. Aftermath. The battle ended with over 500 dead Chinese soldiers lying dead on the battlefield, and 2 of them were captured. On the other hand, the 10th DCT lost only 12 people with 38 wounded and 6 missing. It was a big victory for the fighting Filipinos. For the act of valiance performed by Captain Conrado Yap, was posthumously awarded in Philippine Medal of Valor, the U.S. Distinguishing Service Cross, and was awarded the first Hugok Cordon of the Order of the Military Merit on the 65th anniversary of Korean Armistice Agreement on July 27, 2018. Lieutenant Jose Arriaga Jr. was posthumously awarded Philippine Distinguished Service Cross. This battle, which saved the 3rd Infantry Division, ultimately helped in turning the war in favor of the United Nations. After the war ended in July of 1953, the Philippines and South Korea cemented a great friendship that even stands on this day. UN forces were so impressed with the 10th DCT valiance that they were nicknamed the Fighting Filipinos. To this day, the story of the Fighting Filipinos is a source of national pride among Filipinos because they show that despite poverty, the Filipino people could rise still.